We have largely, I think, deeply risk-averse notion of community. I think a lot of people, under the conditions of liminality, didn't really allow the danger to force them to unlearn.
Welcome to the Fresh Expressions Podcast, Season 5. I'm Heather Jalad, a pastor and cultivator of new faith communities that aim to reach new people in surprising places. This season focuses on community, how to build it, and how new kinds of churches can help combat the loneliness epidemic in North America. Along the way, I'll be joined by friends from the movement to co-host and add their insights as practitioners of Fresh Expressions of Church. We hope this episode deepens your understanding of loving our neighbors and leading faith communities in today's changing landscape. If you enjoy our podcast, please help us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or sharing an episode with friends or on social media. Now, let's dive in. Well, welcome back to the Fresh Expressions Podcast. I'm Heather Jalad, and I am here with my colleague and friend, Luke Edwards. And this season, we have been talking about the loneliness epidemic and how the church can address that by building community. Hey, Luke.
Hello, Heather.
It's good to be with you. I've been doing this solo for most of the season, so it's nice to have a co-host with me here this time, especially with our guest for today's conversation. Alan Hirsch is joining us, and just so grateful to be able to partner in this conversation today, especially with the release of the second release of The Faith of Leap. And the topic of that being Communitas. And I think for most of our listeners, and I know for me, and I'm sure for Luke as well, this idea was something that we maybe heard about for the first time when in the first edition or even in the Forgotten Ways. And this idea of Communitas and this form of community that is born out of this space of liminality. So before we kind of dive into that conversation, Alan, would you just share a little bit with our listeners about who you are, if they don't know who you are already, and a little bit about this idea of Communitas?
Right. Well, my name is Alan Hirsch. I'm currently residing in Melbourne, Australia, with my dear wife, Deborah. We did get around. We spent a lot of time, probably 14 years in the States, based primarily in downtown LA area and then in New York City when COVID hit. And then we decided that we would, rather than die in an expensive apartment in New York, we'd go home to be with our parents and all that stuff, to be with them. So who knows? We left New York at time just as it shut down and just as Australia was shutting down.
Wow.
So we literally had a window of opportunity. But I don't know what I am. A writer, certainly, stirrer, trying to kind of invoke thinking about the church differently and trying to help the church, by and large, in the Western context, engage in missional approaches. So, that's kind of largely what I've been doing and what I still do. Anything else about biographically? I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know about Luke, but I mean, the first book of yours that I ever read was The Shaping of Things to Come, yours and Michael Frost, and that literally changed my world. So to get to have this conversation with you is just a privilege. So thank you.
That was my first book too. My youth leader gave it to me when I was in high school.
Oh, wow. Yeah, gosh. It's a funny thing.
I was a little bit older.
I was a little bit older when I wrote it too, but it's amazing how, you write a book that was written basically as it was an extension of curriculum that we developed, or an approach to learning that we developed for Forge, Mission Training Network. So we're training missionaries to Western contexts. And, it's a miracle for two out-of-towners out of America to get published in America. But it's amazing how that book ended up in all kinds of places with all different kinds of responses, by the way. I remember a guy coming up to me once, he showed me a copy of it. It was battered. I mean, it was
Mm.
battered. And he said, well, this is how it'd go. I'd read a couple of pages and I'd throw the book across the room and thinking, and he'd stew on it. And then he'd go and pick up the book
Great.
again and throw it across the room. And literally, he worked his way through the book, and he was quite thankful on the other side. But it challenged a lot of his thinking at the time. But it's just amazing how God would use oddballs.
I feel like it had the opposite effect on me. I was like, yes, this is it. This is it. This
Most
is
people
it. This is
do
absolutely
have, for most of my writings, for what it's worth, tend to have that effect on most feedback I get is not the negative type. That you read my journal, or you finished my sentences, or they say, I thought it was crazy, but I don't feel I am anymore. But I say, yes, you probably are, but you're not alone. It's all right. And but that goes to a certain idea about that is important to me about latent capacities or latent potential. That these are their instincts in the church that I think lend itself to the movemental understanding. And people, it's kind of below consciousness, but I think they sense it. We can touch on that if you want a little later on, because that comes up. It can come up in liminality. But so it's like that instinctive approach to church. Yeah.
There was something that really struck me, even just in the very beginning of the book, and you talked about leaving New York at the beginning of the pandemic before the shutdown there. And, you talk about the Communitas that was born out of the liminality of the tsunami in 2004 and 9/11. And then the pandemic happens, and you would think, wow, okay, that is liminality right there. That is catalytic to Communitas. And then you look at what happened, and at least at first glance, it's like that is the opposite of what happened. So, like, what do you think happened there?
Should we at least give a definition at least to these terms, so that
Let's do, yeah, please.
Because I do want to get there. And obviously that's an issue. So liminality and communitas. I discovered these terms. I was doing research for my book, The Forgotten Ways, and where I was trying to grapple with kind of the phenomenon of movements that work against the odds, often in very difficult, persecuted environments, and yet they get it on. So this is The Forgotten Ways. And when you were looking at the type of community that these people had, it's somewhat different to what we would see as like a fellowship event on a Sunday or weekday fellowship, where it's a slap on the back and a handshake and off you go. It's that's probably our notion of community is very much weaker and would never survive the kind of conditions that, say, persecuted movements like the Chinese underground church has to experience. So I was struggling to find terminology to name that. And I came across Victor Turner, who was an anthropologist. In various circumstances, interesting, he ended up in New York City too, studying the role of artists as edge people. He called them edge people. Similar idea that, they come out from the edges or the liminal places to inform and renew society. But he was doing research in Africa on the rites of passage, mainly around young boys as they transition to being considered men in the community, where they actually cast out of the community into a place of, disorientation, marginalization, danger, ordeal, challenge, all those things that they faced literally for a 3 to 6 month period, depending, as 13-year-olds, by the way, into the African bush. So it's quite serious. And what would happen, he discovered that first, they'd go, one by one or two by two, they just break apart. And, with 2-3 weeks into this thing, they're never going to survive one by one or two by two because it's pretty tricky out there and they have no idea what they're doing. Not a clue. They're not prepared for this in any way because they actually were brought up as in the compound, and they did basic works in the safe compound. So in this context, he discovered that the boys eventually discover themselves as a community. And this he calls communitas, but it comes about from this conditions of risk, danger, ordeal, disorientation, marginalization, task that requires them to find each other, or maybe not, and in which case they disappear. So that's going to be part of the answer to the COVID thing. But Communitas is the kind of community that develops in the context of ordeal, challenge, adventure. And then he interestingly talks about the reintegration of the boys into society now in the male compound, and they tell stories and bring their stories that awakens memory, and it renews the entire village, actually. So he saw this as a cycle of renewal, not only just helping develop a sense of camaraderie at a very deep level, but also renewed the entire village as people remember their stories and their liminal conditions, which is, remember when kind of stories are like that. So it was very, I think, yes, that's exactly the idea. That's what you're seeing in the early church and also in the underground church in China, which is the two major movements I was studying. And it's because they are persecuted, sometimes severely so, and they cannot do this alone. They're never going to be able to survive on their own. So they actually discover each other. They become a band of brothers and band of sisters in a very deep way. And that's the conditions of Communitas. Yeah. To the issue of the COVID thing, it's interesting, yes. So what doesn't kill you makes you better is maybe a principle here. And the conditions of risk and danger, ordeal, are real. How we go about resolving or engaging with these things becomes the critical thing. For instance, let me change back to the metaphor of movements. If you look at what happens in China, now a whole lot of conditions come together. This is the forgotten ways again. Not just liminality, Communitas as a triggering. And by the way, the emphasis here is on liminality as the trigger event, right, or the conditions where Communitas comes in. So ability to face risk and thrive in the context of risk. Risk-taking is the important issue. We have largely, I think, in the Western world, a deeply risk-averse notion of community. Yeah. They are middle class, and middle class are already in that zone of safety, security, comfort, convenience, very strong conditions of the middle class. And so that seeks safety, security, largely for our children. You want to bring them up in a very safe environment, but that can get overprotective. And even now, I'm told that kids now, post-pandemic, but also social media and all the problems of danger for children is that people are not letting their kids go out and play on the with other kids in the streets, and so they actually becoming very risk averse. It's just an interesting phenomenon at the moment. So I think what actually happened, Heather, it was I think a lot of people under the conditions of liminality, I think went and hid under a bush. They didn't really allow the danger to force them to unlearn what they. I mean, a lot of these people in ministry have done 8 years of study, praise be to God, to actually drive that little sucker, right? And they're very vested in that, in the outcomes, and they are the beneficiaries of it, and they're also the maintainers of it. When that came under threat, and we have to see this also, friends, as a revelatory moment that God was doing something, because history's in his hands, right? And that events like that are not just random. They're something of the God's doing something there to reveal our fragilities and our insecurities in our system. And I think I think most people, from what I can see, didn't face up with that very, very well, and rather chose to hid from it, and then as soon as they could, double down on what they really knew. So a lot have kicked the ball down the road. The can is down the road now. Well, I think in the end we have to deal with a kind of flawed system of ecclesia, and but some have broken through the other side, and that's very, very promising, but not enough. Well, they can. Yes, there's some really good things happening that can really show a way forward, but amazed at how people just went back to much more diminished communities and just tried to settle back into the same old rhythm. Thinking, I don't know. That's a problem. So I think, honestly, I should warn you guys, I am the Lord of the long answer.
I see Luke. I see Luke's wheels spinning. He's like ready to say something.
Will this guy ever shut up? Okay, I'm all yours, man.
No, I was just thinking about this season we're talking a lot about loneliness, and I think it flows out of the pandemic, but that not all the people that are experiencing loneliness, certainly some, and some of the folks that I know, that when they withdraw from deep community, from social interactions beyond work, that a lot of it is avoiding the risk of community, and so I wonder how do we encourage folks that have retreated, whether it's been in the pandemic or just into social media, or they'd rather watch Netflix than go out and make connections, whatever it is. How do we encourage people to take more of those social risks?
Well, one of the things about liminality, actually all the MDNA, let me go back to Forgotten Ways, but they are high leverage points for change. And you can do something about these things. And I would argue, actually, liminality and Communitas is actually one of the most readily accessible ways in which you can actually stimulate, growth in communitas, by literally giving people a task to do that they could not do alone. And it might, for some people, on a very risk-averse group of people, it could be simply crossing the street together and doing something in your neighborhood. It might not be dangerous or death-defying. Actually, it might be a lot of fun. So I'll tell you one of the ones I saw early on when I first came to America. I was doing some teaching on this down in San Diego, and a church plant, then about 100, 150 people in the church plant, very new church plant. They loved the idea. I didn't know this. It reports back to me later. A couple of years later, I met the guy again. He said, look, we did this amazing thing. He said, we live in San Diego, just one of the most beautiful, prosperous cities. I mean, if you've ever been there, it is a magnificent city. It's everything LA wants to be. But just down below the border in Tijuana, there are people who live on garbage heaps, literally on the garbage heap, and they scrap for their lives, by living on the garbage heap. And these guys said, not on our shift. No way. We're going to do something about it. They agreed that all of them would take 2 weeks vacation or unpaid leave a year. They would not just send money, but they would take their money and resources and go over the border and spend the 2 weeks serving the poor. What they were going to do is to build houses. They didn't have to be fancy houses or anything like that, but they would build houses. And they did. And when they reported back to me, I don't know, it was a few years later, they said it's been amazing. We've literally created X amount of houses and people with running water, and they're not living on the garbage heap any longer. So it was a thrill. And they said, we learned so much in that kind of environment, because my wife always says this to me. We need the poor because they teach us about ourselves. And these guys learned that. They said, yes, we became a team, we became a Communitas, but, we were taught about the generosity of the poor and all that. They said it was profoundly moving, impacted them very deeply. Now, that's a simple, example of it's not death-defying, but it will cost you something to get out of your comfort zone and into the place where, you have to just do it together. And that creates a community that, we've been there. Short-term missions does the same thing. Yeah. Group of kids going on a short-term missions come back as a band. Something's happened to them. And then we tell them to sit down and go back to normal. We don't know how to leverage that for renewal.
So can there be a kind of rhythm of kind of going into that liminal space and then definitely coming back into a safer space? But so you don't have to always be living in the liminality.
Totally. I would say you can ritualize it. Don't criticize it, literalize it. Yeah. But those who know will know. Heather's laughing like crazy, and I don't know if Luke knows what he's laughing at, but that's an old song for
just laughing at you.
We got Alan Hirsch rapping or something on here. I don't know.
Old reggae song about the legalization of marijuana.
Well, it's interesting because I was with a church just last night, and we were talking about evangelism, and I asked the people that were there, when did Jesus become real to you? And every person's story consisted of they were a part of a church. They were walking with people who were a part of a church. And there were certain instances where Jesus became real to them. And one of the gentlemen told a story about doing the walk to Emmaus. And I had never thought about that as being a liminal space before. But having just read this book, I was like, okay, there was everything's taken away.
Yeah.
Get your cell phone taken away, you get everything taken away, and you're put in this group of people that you don't know. And then you have this form of camaraderie, right? And I'm like, okay, that there it is.
It's camping, and
There it is.
that's the fun. Actually, one of the lovely little terms, a group of people I know who love the idea of Communitas, they do a lot of fun together. So they call it funnitas. I like it. Has some funnitas. Now, that's the good side. And again, we can cultivate this. We can almost say, like, in order to be a member of our church, you have to go and help build a house for the poor, down the road, whatever. You have to do something that kind of adds value. It's a rite of passage. And this idea of ritualizing it into community is, I think, very, very important. And it could be fun. And it's a way of bonding, not hazing, but bonding, but it's kind of like a initiation rites. I think honestly, I think it's a good thing. And but the other circumstances are when you're sometimes thrust into conditions of liminality, and and that's when I think the challenge is when we don't have an exercise this. We basically rugged individualists already in America, and. Yeah, so you can see in some cases, like as you mentioned, the floods in New Orleans, 10, 15, 20 years ago, well, I don't know, a long time ago, actually did create a kind of groundswell of communitas where people began to kind of give their stuff away and help people and bring people on board. And there were also some oddball, weirdo stuff going on there too, not of a good variety. So you can see, but the conditions there did and can create a sense of community or not. And you can find yourself in, quite dark spaces when you go into Mad Max territory where everyone's got guns and, and they're going to shoot you to protect their water supplies or There's that kind of, honestly, friends, I was living in LA for a long time. And I used to think, gosh, if we had a huge disaster here, earthquake, which could really happen. We had earthquakes regularly there, not a serious one. And then all the supply that trucks and everything else can't get in or anything people have got guns here, and then water becomes a dangerous thing, a scarce commodity. And I don't know. Most people, I think, might go in a bad direction. Don't know. Maybe I'm thinking the worst of people, but it could get really dark. So
we've been going through some really crazy disaster in Western North Carolina, up in the mountains. And I think for the most part, it's been, really positive community showing up for one another. The churches, our United Methodist churches that I work for the United Methodist Church in Western North Carolina. So our churches have become real hubs of the community in ways that a lot of them had kind of hadn't been in a long time. So it's been interesting to see how that disasters brought people together. Some of the most faithful folks that are coming to serve are folks that had drifted away from the church, but are coming back to their original church to serve. It's really interesting.
Classic example, and yes, in a situation where people find themselves anew in a fresh kind of way. So, and this is very hopeful. But like I said, it can be cultivated, friends. You can actually, do things that push you out of your comfort zones. We ran a thing called Forge Mission Training Network, still very much alive and part of in the US big time. One of our principles is that we put people in conditions where they don't know what they really don't know what they're doing. So I say, if someone wants to learn youth mission, we say, you youth pastor, we can help you get better at being a youth pastor, but that's not really our thing. So what we're going to do is you want to learn, the mission side of it. We're going to say, okay, so you know that you're an expert in what you're doing now. So if you draw a circle around me and think, I'm an expert at that circle. Get to the edge of the circle. How do you feel now? You got 50% you know, 50% you don't know. Yeah, it's a little more precarious. And we say, come on, just another 25% out into the world of unknown. So 75%, I have no idea what I'm doing. 25% I do. Now you're ready to learn. And because in those conditions, you're going to face real possibility of failure.
In one of the sections, you talk about extremist leaders. So the ones that are sharing the risk with their followers. Says this isn't just grandstanding. Leaders truly share, even take on greater risks in extremist situations. Leaders in other environments, keep this in mind. Don't ask followers to do anything you wouldn't do yourself. I'd say that probably most of our listeners on the podcast are fresh expression leaders or folks that want to be fresh expression leaders. Mm-hmm. What do you think that looks like? What does that kind of leadership look like in a fresh expression?
Well, that's a metaphor, or that kind of frame comes from a guy who's writing about the intelligent soldier. And that's it's not so much the general in the back telling you to go and do that over there and die for the cause. You have groups of people led by captain or lieutenant, that actually they lead the group into battle. So in other words, they're not getting paid more than other people on the group. Their lives are at risk too. So they're actually demonstrating the capacity to face death like everyone else is. And that means that it's that bonding that begins to happen. And anyone who actually has been in the military knows this quite well, actually. You don't even have to like the person in your troop. You might not, left alone, you might not like him, but on the battlefield, you will be brothers or sisters. Or you're not going to survive this thing. So you literally are forced into a kind of a communitas kind of situation. And I would argue actually sports teams could be the same. Not as dangerous, of course. But yes, I would say for us as leaders, it's like you can't be calling people into conditions of taking risk when you yourself are risk averse and demonstrably so. So I think you have to be a person willing to take risks yourself. When I was your age, brother, talking about Luke here, and possibly, and both of you quite a lot younger than me. I actually turned 65 yesterday. So there you go.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
It's yesterday here, so it's technically still your birthday
today. It's today, yeah.
I get 2 birthdays. But yes, interesting. I should have kept this going, to be honest. It faded. And I used to have a personal discipline that every year I would do something more stupid, at least one stupid thing more stupid than I did the year before. And that was a risk I take. I would deliberately say, I have to do something stupid, silly, and literally push myself out of my comfort zones as a discipline. And I don't know why it slipped away, but it did. And you find yourself now at 65, you're thinking, yeah, that's an interesting challenge to me, to be honest with you. It's very easy at my age to kind of be orienting towards a more stable, trying to get your income based, stable so that you can, I'm not going to retire ever, but I am going to take it easier, But all I have to say, that becomes a mentality that you realize, this is not good, so... I need to kind of find out what else I can do. A bit silly, stupid.
I'm wondering, because we didn't ask this question, why another edition of this book? What led you to do this?
Well, okay, so when this book first came out, I think it was around 2012 or something like that. Mm-hmm. I had about 4 other books come out at the same time, partly because they were just timelines and they just converged. And one called On the Verge I did very quickly with Dave Ferguson, and that was thrown in on it. So literally, I came up, within an 18-month period, I had about 5 books out, and Michael had, I think, 1 other, and then we came out with, the Faith of Leap, and so here's the thing, stupid. It's just bad marketing, because even if you loved, either Frosty or myself as writer, you're never going to buy 7 books. No, you might get 1 or 2, maybe 3, and that's what happened. It kind of came out in this flurry of other books, and it damaged them all, to be honest. So the discipline here, if you ever want to write, 12 to 18 months between books is critically important. Don't ever bunch them up like that. So that's the lesson, but you can't unlearn it. But I got the opportunity to buy the rights back from Baker and then republish it. We have our own Movement Leaders Collective publishing house now. So, opportunity to get it out there again. It is, honestly, it's one of my favorite books. And it just didn't get read as well as it could or should have been read. I think it's accessible, solid, meaningful work, and we just wanted to give it another chance. So there you go.
Any additions or changes, or?
Yeah, we it wasn't huge amount of substantial change, but we added a lot of female voice. We realized, oh my gosh, both me and Michael were horrified. We didn't have enough female voices there, so we worked very hard to kind of get that going. And then just some more cultural references were more updated. You can refer to things in the 80s or 90s. Not that we did too much of that, but even the September 11 thing, so you have to bring common cultural events. So that kind of thing, and then some substance, but we didn't ever feel that we needed to change fundamentally any of the content per se. We just made it read better, maybe. Might update it. The second edition always makes it a more readable book. It should do anyway. Get another chance of editing.
Yeah, I think the core concepts are pretty timeless. I do think one thing that has risen up, and I guess one of the biggest barriers to all this, is the rise of social media. I was just thinking about, even when we go on quote unquote adventures these days, the national parks are overrun with selfie sticks and tourists doing foolish things. And it's just like, the social media is just really, I think, throwing a huge wrench in adventure and risk and all of that.
Yeah, I think that's
Do you have any thoughts about how all this intertwines?
That's what to do meaningful kind of engagements together with other people. And I think worry less about the social media, but the story capacity to tell stories that kind of, your personal stories in certain environments become very, very important. But to do some crazy things together, I think it's really important.
Instead of having your own brand, you can have like your collective brand.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, you said something about, having something to say, coming from where you are in Australia, and having something to say over here in the States, and now being back in Australia. I'm wondering, how you have seen this because, our Surgeon General named this as an epidemic, 2 years ago, a year ago. I'm wondering how you've seen this play out in Australia. If it's more of a Western problem just in general, or what have you seen?
COVID and all that stuff.
Obviously that exacerbated something that was already there, certainly.
Well, yes, it definitely. And we have much more of a nanny state at work here. So actually, our city was the most locked down city in the world. Over 13 months of lockdown. And, but here's the thing. I mean, it's a nanny state, but it's a nanny. She cares. as opposed to some of what goes on in America in these conditions where you've got people, I think, being very, very uncivil and ugly.
Mm-hmm.
It showed very dark sides of the character, the national character. Even though I don't particularly agree with our approach over here, it was at least a socially responsible way of dealing with it, I think. It was a bit panicky, but get the point. But I would say Australians are, actually, they won't like me saying this, but it's true, are reasonably risk averse anyway. And I'm not likely to kind of push innovation very much. I'm an aberration in that regard. Hence my rebellious kind of attitudes to these things, because you almost had to be to be something. So it is not not a good look. The churches are 60% of what they were before. They're going just back to worship services, now a little bit online. It's just the same old, same old. Again, I don't think they've done the critical work of thinking through the ecclesiology in ways. What was God revealing to us in these things about our dependence on a Sunday gathering? My gosh, really? Is it the church is just a Sunday gathering? Where do you get that from?
Yeah.
Yeah. So having a broader view of ecclesia. Yeah. I always remembered this time. I heard a guy, he was a senior pastor of a very large church, and under the conditions of COVID, all these friends of also senior pastors of large churches were complaining, "Oh, yeah, the church is closing. The church is closing." The guy says, "No, no, 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 no. The church isn't closing. The church is opening up in thousands of other places." I'm thinking, there's what we needed to see more of. Okay, let's lean into it and then reorganize ourselves, distribute our assets differently, and completely make this a distributed network. You've got a movement in the making. And then, yes, you'd have to seriously rethink how you actually organize. But gosh, it was an opportunity which I don't think many churches took. So it's I think it's really sad to show how safe we've become.
I think I might have said that once or twice in the midst of the pandemic and made some people really mad.
Well, you've got to keep saying it, sis. Yeah. But I think the reality is that not a lot of people want to do that, but I think honestly, America is going to experience an accelerated decline of huge proportions. It's like Americans adopt very quickly, but they also disadopt. Is there such a word?
Default, yeah.
They let go very, very quickly too. So what you see is high adoption curves, but it's exponential. And I think under current cultural conditions, your political kind of environments, I think the evangelicals have blown the brand, completely blown it. And I think you're going to have a mass, we call it deconstruction. I think, I completely get it. The problem is, and I think this is maybe something Fresh Expressions needs to step more into, is what are we doing about those good people who are leaving the church in order to keep their faith? There are millions of them out there. And I don't see anyone doing anything to try and kind of get ahead of that game and to name the tribe and to name the problem and to organize a little bit more. And this is a disaster of leadership, in my opinion. And these people are good people who are leaving. I feel myself at odds with it now in a deep way. And I've had deep commitments to it, you know what I mean? So I think that's a real challenge, So there's a whole blue ocean of possibility among those people to organize them.
I was just wondering if you had another story of a Fresh Expression that's really lived into this vision of the faith of Leap.
My wife led a church in in LA, in the downtown area called the Tribe of LA. And the tribe was actually birthed out of Burning Man. So it was a whole lot of burners who couldn't find any place in normal churches, who'd come to the Lord either on the playa or, as part of the arts community. There was a big art community that the church was right as a part of it, incarnationally present. About 800 people living in an old brewery, literally, sometimes in the chimneys, and it was something else. 800 people, and many of these became studios and some beautiful art going on in that place. And and every year that we do pilgrimage, it's one form of liminality. Is pilgrimage, classic one. You've already mentioned it there already, Heather. And it is a schlep getting to the playa. It is actually a big deal. You have to bring all your stuff. It's a gift economy. Nothing's for sale. You bring more for other people. And the very fact that people have journeyed from all walks of life, 75,000 people gather in the desert in Nevada, and it's dry, bleak, and lots of dust and lots of fun and beauty and crazy, and yes, but it's a remarkable event. And we would go regularly, but so the church was actually very much part of it, would help out in so many ways in building and deconstructing it every time. And and that was very much part of the church's ritual every year. So we did about 5 times, and then I still got one more in me, I think. So we can do maybe a fresh expressions training event on the playa. Come on.
There we go.
Come on.
Wow.
Expressions
I'm
pilgrimage to
telling
Burning
you,
Man.
it'll be fantastic.
Wow.
Sign me up.
Really.
Wow.
I taught a...
I bet you have a lot of people who want to do
Well,
that.
yeah. We actually had a Wheaton College, a class on the campus, on the playa, called Prophecy and the Arts. So I think about cool. 8 to 12 Wheaton students that came together, and we did lectures there for them. So there you go.
I know we're supposed to be wrapping up probably, but one other thing that came to mind when I read this book was just our fresh expressions that are really thriving among communities of people who are experiencing a lot of pain. So whether it's folks with addiction, abuse, violence, incarceration, racism, like some of those fresh expressions, man, they're by a mile our most transformative ones. Yeah. I wonder how that kind of plays into this framework.
Well, just think of it, Alcoholics Anonymous, What holds that together is the common struggle, that they need each other to survive. They're never going to do this alone. They've worked that out through just trying on their own, Oh, I do. I think this is very true for a lot of communities on the edge. Margins tend to be, when you're marginal, you have to rely on each other in a different way to survive. And there's a sense of comradeship in suffering, definitely. Most definitely.
Well, again, Alan, thank you so much for this conversation. One thing that we do ask our guests to do is to pray for our listeners when we close out the conversation. Would you do that for us?
Can.
Thank you.
A lot of things have been said here, so I'm going to ask, Lord, that people will be discerning, to know that which is true, to reject that which is false and not helpful, and to forgive me the difference. Lord, but I do pray, Father, that if there's anything here that someone listening here feels that you're saying to them, I pray that you would bug them with it in the name of Jesus, and they would not get away from actually a place where they learn to obey that calling, to go into the strange, difficult, risky place, and to stand for something in that space with other people, learning what it means to be a communitas together. I pray, Lord, that there be lots of creative effort that comes out of this, that people be inspired to just go across the street, paint someone's house, whatever, to do something outside the confines of a safe church kind of environment, Lord. Help us, Lord, to follow you into all these places, Jesus, to be disciples, to stick as close as we can to you as you lead us through the marketplace, the pubs, the schools, the various places where you love to kind of be. Yeah, help us to be a faithful people in our time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Fresh Expressions is a worldwide movement of everyday missionaries who want to see churches thrive in the places we live, eat, work, and play by leveraging the creativity and endurance of the inherited church. To learn a simple 5-phase process for starting a new expression of church, go to freshexpressions.com/how-to-start. Want to learn more from the Fresh Expressions team? Head over to freshexpressions.com/training to learn ways we can work together to provide coaching, training, and inspiration for your church or organization. You can also get more resources like this on FX Connect, an online community full of other church leaders passionate about reaching new people in new places. Access our entire library of practical and inspiring training materials and connect with other church leaders at fxconnectus.org. Season 5 of the Fresh Expressions podcast is hosted by me, Heather Jalad. It's edited by Joel Limbaum and produced by Jeanette Statz, Kathleen Blackie, and Chris Morton. Our U.S. Director of Ministries is Shannon Kaiser, and our Senior Director is Dr. Christopher Backert. If you have learned something or been encouraged by this podcast, please help us spread the word. You can give us a review on Apple Music or Spotify and share this episode on social media. Now may God bless you in your work for the kingdom.